So good morning and welcome to, I guess, the fourth route around Leeds. Welcome and welcome to the fourth route around Hull. There's a fifth one. I won't be able to include that today because even this one to the north of the city centre is quite a long one, and there's quite a lot to see, much more than I thought there would. But those people from Hull will probably know that there's a lot to see along this route. So where we're going to go, we're going to set off at the Paragon Station. So I think it's just... we're going to set off at the Paragon Station, go up Ferensway, which is also a part of the ring road that I guess sort of goes all the way around Hull, and then come along Paragon Street. Most people probably go along Albemarle Street, which is sort of a bit more of a main road, but I'm going on the street behind that to see some of the backs of these buildings, and then coming out onto I'm going to say George Street, but it's Jarratt Street here, and there's a very fine Roman Catholic church here. This is a square around here with the new theatre on that, built as assembly halls. And if you know Hull, then they're coming down to where the History Centre is, which is just on this corner here. Coming down then onto George Street, because George Street's quite a long one, and picking up some very fine buildings here. And then unfortunately coming to the part of the ring road here, but I'm not shown on this map here, but I'm making a detour here up Bourne Street onto Charterhouse Lane, where there's some very fine almshouses founded back in the 1300s. Coming back here and then coming on to Charlotte Street, which I think is probably a continuation of that road there that came across, but because over the years has sort of been severed and cut off, and coming down really the top part of High Street. This is the part of High Street that we looked at last time, and coming to an end here on Alfred Gelder Street, pushed through in about 1900, severing the High Street, and this is Dry Pool Bridge here. This is the North Bridge up here, very similar in appearance to the Dry Pool Bridge. So let's have a look at the first part of it, setting off at Paragon Station, actually inside of it, because there's quite a few things to see in there. Coming up Ferensway, this whole area was sort of developed around about sort of 2003, it covers sort of 40 acres around here, and they built the St Stephen's Shopping Centre, named after a church that was bombed in the Second World War. We've got the Hull Truck Theatre Company here. Then coming down this horrible road here called North Street, which is really the backs of sort of shops and things, and coming on to Prospect Street, and there really isn't much on there. This block here is the Prospect Shopping Centre. I'm not coming down quite as far as Albion Street. This is where the Central Library is. You can see the extension of that, but the very fine frontage of the library is there. But we're coming along Baker Street to see some fine buildings here. Just on the corner here is the Quaker Meeting House, former Quaker Meeting House. So I'm coming as far as the Central Library on this first part of the journey. So Paragon Station is really the city centre started to spread to the west, I guess because the docks were at the east side of that, and because they largely spread out this area because of the opening of the Paragon Station in very late 1847, because most people call it 1848, probably when the first passenger services probably started to run. If we remember, is that the first line to Hull was an extension of the Leeds line to Selby in 1840. It then terminated at the Humber Dock, which is the Marina today. And it was really a goods line, that was. It really wasn't for passengers. And then other lines were built. A line was built out to Bridlington and onwards to meet the York-Scarborough line at Seamer, and that opened in 1846. But that terminated on the east side of Hull, so it didn't come into this station because obviously it wasn't there at the time. But this was met up with the Selby line when that was rerouted for passengers largely, and the Paragon Station opened because it was part of the Railway King's Empire. That's George Hudson of York. And you can see from when we see the film as well, it's a glazed canopy spanning 5 railway lines around here. Some of them are double lines as well. And so just that's the station. So but looking at this sort of concourse here, it's 3 sort of statue type, or 2 statues and a blue plaque. and because they normally go to the railway lines just down there, as you'll see on the bit of film later on. This is the more modern sculpture here. It's called The Journey and was unveiled in 2017. So that'll be part of the City of Culture as well. And it simply says it is by HMJ, which actually might be a metalwork company from looking at it. But looking over here, where this chap with the bicycle is, he's next to the statue of Philip Larkin. Not born in Hull, he was born in Coventry in 1922, came to Hull in 1955, where for the rest of his life he was the university librarian. He died in the city at the age of 63 in December 1965, because all his major poetry works were written in the city. This statue here was placed here on the 25th anniversary of his death, and because the slate base here was added a year later. And it says on the bottom of that, quoting from his anthology of poetry called Wits and Weddings, I think that was published in 1961 or 62. And it basically says, that Whitsun, I was late getting away. And then Philip Larkin, poet and librarian, 1922 to 1965. The statue is by Martin Jennings, was unveiled in December 2010, and at a cost of £65,000. It's a bronze, and because it was funded through the Philip Larkin Society. He wrote about the station in his poetry book, The Wits and Weddings, as well. And he says, when your train comes to rest in Paragon Station against a row of docile buffers, you alight with an end-of-a-line sense of freedom. And that's what it says on this plaque. Sounds a bit further over to an exit from Paragon Station as well. It's part of the Philip Larkin Trail, I'd say 25 locations across sort of Hull and East Yorkshire as well. We've seen another one of these sort of trail plaques, and that was at Blacktoft, because they're by the side of the Humber that he used to cycle out to. So that's where some of the inspiration for some of his poems have come from in there. So that's the second statue. The other blue plaque here is to the Spiders from Mars, and I guess this is largely to begin with from Holborn Mick Ronson, who was a lead guitarist, born in 1946 with David Bowie's backing band, the Spiders from Mars, from 1970 to 1973, includes the album Ziggy Stardust as well. He also played with Bob Dylan and did Walk on the Wild Side with Lou Reed as well. He died in April 1993 of liver cancer. Down there underneath his name is Trevor Boulder, the bass player, who was also born in Hull in 1950 and too died of cancer at Cottingham in 2013 at the age of 62. The drummer Woody Woodmansey was born in Driffield in 1950 and is still alive today, and tours supporting other artists performing David Bowie's songs, including his producer Tony Visconti. The three of them formed the whole band, the Rats, before being taken over by David Bowie and renamed the Spiders from Mars. So that's the plaque in there to that group. So this is the sort of the wider view. This statue, as you can see down there, is of Philip Larkin down there. This concourse was relaid out in 2017. And so if you came in that year, they're probably finishing a lot of works that they set off with for the City of Culture. And that included the placing of the clock here. It has no sort of historical value unless you know better. The laying out of this concourse cost £1.4 million. There are a plaque on the plinth that the clock stands on, and it's to honour Captain William Colbeck. He was born 1871, died in 1930, and Alfred Cheetham, 1866 to 1918, and goes on to say two of many seafarers on the ship The Morning who participated in the Antarctic expeditions to relieve Captain Scott, 1902 to 1904, and were welcomed by thousands at this station upon their return. Also looking just a bit further over there is a former, I think it was a waiting room, this was, or a booking office. This was built in 1904. It isn't in its original position, as it was moved in 2006 for the opening up of the bus station, which is just to the right of where we are, just around here. So it really is a transport interchange, as we can see, because this was sort of built in 2007. When we cross the road outside, you can look down the bus station itself. So a lot of work going on in say that 2003 to 2007 area, when they really completely rebuilt the area out here and certainly improved Paragon Station itself, for those who remember going before that. Coming out is that there's 100 mosaics of birds all on the walls here, and they were created by Sue Kershaw alongside school pupils to celebrate the City of Culture in 2017. These are names on these boards here to men who died in World War I and I guess World War II as well, so they surround that as well. And not at this time, going to, but on Wednesday, when I look around the city centre, is the War Memorial is directly across the road from the front of the station. So that's probably why it's appropriate to put in here. But if we go outside and have a look, that's the sort of the frontage today. And because it actually was not the first frontage to the station, but the second frontage. The first frontage is actually round the other side, as that when the station was built in 1847 and faces onto Anlaby Road, because this one wasn't completed until 1904. And because if people remember going into Hull before that, on top of here was a 4-storey ugly office block that was built in 1962. And this was demolished, and you can say this new canopy added in 2007 when all the other works took place inside. I was at the wrong time of day to take the photograph of the front of the Railway Hotel, which is abuts the railway station here. And because that was by G.T. Andrews, who probably designed the railway station as well. It was a very notable sort of architect to the railway industry. And they could say that was completed in 1851, but nearly burnt down in 1900, because it's a very fine hotel there indeed. So I'm going to end up going up Ferensway here. Ferens takes its name from the chap who funded the City Art Gallery as well, the Ferens in there as well. But we're coming up here, as you'll see on the film, crossing across this road that leads into the bus station. So you can see that there's an enormous amount of buses coming up and down Ferensway as part of this as well. And because they spaces there for 30, or stands for 38 buses. I think coaches can come in here as well. So you take your life into your own hands coming across this road to the St Stephen's Shopping Centre. Again, a 2007 development, officially opened in September of that year at a cost of £200 million. And because it was part of that development, included the bus station as well. In fact, the shopping centre stands on the site of the old bus station. You say it takes its name, St Stephen's, from the church that once stood here that was flattened in a bombing raid in 1940. Because if you go inside there, because it's very modern in there, because the anchor tenant there being Tesco, and includes other sort of notable high street shops like Next, mobile phone shops, Greggs, River Island, and a real cinema in there as well. And that's probably what's sucked part of the lifeblood out of the city centre itself. So with this shopping centre opened down there, I think it's got a TK Maxx in there and other shops like that. So which would traditionally haven't been in a shopping centre, have been in the town centre itself. So that's probably partially to blame for a lot of the large empty units, which are going to be very hard to fill, but when we see on Wednesday morning. Coming out there, continuing up Ferensway, this is the Albemarle Music Centre. It's home to the council's music service, and inside there's a 300-seat theatre. I'm going to say it too was part of the 2007 development and cost £3.5 million. So that just sort of stands back. This is the St Stephen's Shopping Centre curving round there. And in this sort of tiny paved area on the other side there, this building here coming off to the right, well, that's the Hull Truck Theatre Company. And they can say a new 440-seat cinema was opened here in 2009. whole truck was started by unemployed actor Mike Bradwell, and he founded it in 1971. It actually moved to this location in the former St Stephen's Church Hall in 1983. So I guess the church hall wasn't bombed, but the church was. And again, it was rebuilt as part of a 2007 redevelopment of this area, because of this theatre here called cost £15 million. That's a photograph I found from the inside of it. Became internationally famous under the sort of director playwright John Godber, who's been associated since 1984, and since 1983, Mark Babridge is the current artistic director. So, to say, a permanent theatre in Hull, to say, taking on modern theatre, whereas the new theatre a bit later on tend to take in touring productions. So that's Ferensway, looking down to where it was, because they're part of that St Stephen's shopping centre. There's a holiday express there. This is the end of the Hull Truck Theatre Company, and you can come across the pedestrian crossing here across the road to go onto North Street. And I say, because I mentioned it was the Thomas Ferens, who the street is named after. He was born in 1847, died in 1930. He was a Liberal MP for the city and public benefactor, especially to the art gallery right on Victoria Square, right in the town city centre. So we're coming down North Street here, which is a horrible street, and it really is just the backs of shops that we see on the other side. So there's nothing really to see down here, but it's only a very short street and comes out onto Prospect Street here. I can say it's at the sort of really is the edge of the city centre shopping area around here, because they are mostly, you can see, estate agents, and I think there's a lot of training companies. Turning to the left-hand side, because there was a large multi-storey car park, and it ends with the Travelodge hotel at the end, at the edge of that sort of dual carriageway that goes around the city centre. So there isn't really much to see down here. So this building here, which looks like a church hall, and in fact was a church. This was the St Andrew's Presbyterian Church, originally a Gothic building built in 1866. But like a lot of Hull, as I mentioned weeks ago, it was hit very hard by bombing raids in sort of 1940 and 41, and it hit the Presbyterian church that stood here. That's the newer Presbyterian church that was erected in 1960, but that was part of the closures of 1972, when the Presbyterians united with the Congregationalists to form the United Reformed Church, and then this was made redundant by them, and is now home to the Hull Schools Library Service. So that's what that's used for. That's why it says SLS on the front. And then coming to the end of the sort of the road down here, we come to the Central Library. This is the extension of 1962, but Albion Street starts at these traffic lights down here, and there is a much finer frontage to the library that dates from 1901, and it has a dome and a very elaborate frontage. But we're going to go down Baker Street down there, but that's after we've seen this first bit of film. So, right, so we're at this point here now. So I'm going to come along Baker Street here because it runs parallel to Albion Street, which is a bit more of the main street in front of it, and crossing across Percy Street. Going to continue on Baker Street there to its end, and then it turns into Union Street along here because there's some stables buildings here because there's some very fine Georgian buildings along here which I have photographed, so you could see those if you're going to come along there. Because there's besides the Central Library, there's another nice building there, but the rest of them are fairly modern after that. Then and coming on to Albion Street sort of comes to an end, I think, around about here, and then turns into Jarratt Street. So this part of the leg of the journey, I'm then going to stop here at the St Charles Borromeo Roman Catholic Church there, and I was lucky enough to go there when it was actually technically closed, but they're doing some railing work on the outside, and so they allow me, and that's normally open I think from 11 till 1 every day. So make sure if you're going to hold to look at that. So we've got some film on the inside of that. So let's set off at the beginning of Baker Street. I chose this one because it's sort of a bit unusual coming down here. And because it's public toilets there. It looks like it might have been a former sort of air raid shelter, but I don't think so. But they were last used in 2017 as part of a City of Culture, and because they for an art installation. So they've been closed for a long time, like the rest of the toilets in Hull. Although I've since found out that the toilets under the statue of Queen Victoria there have now been reopened. Really what we're seeing here is the back of the 1962 extension of the library. This is the rear of another library extension of 1930. So it's you don't see the frontage of 1901 coming around here, but you can't see that at the moment because there's quite a lot of works and lorries and metal railings and stuff around there. So we're coming to this fine building here, and this is the former British Gas Light Company, and because that was a very modern company coming in there, really selling sort of, I guess, street lights and lighting, and gas into sort of for domestic use as well. Built in 1879, and because it extended in 1910. No wonder the nightclub in it is called Fuel. So it does sort of have a continuation of its name along with that. And then the next building along, quite spoilt by this ugly frontage to it. I guess that's as dated up there 1886, and this was the former Hull and Sculcoats dispensary. I presume I'm pronouncing Sculcoats in the right way, or certainly how it's written, and because that's what that is. Across the other side of the road is this fantastic looking building as well, and because there was no mention of it in books that I've tried to find out about, but it's I have since found that it's the Albion Congregational School of 1867. So I guess it's to do with the church that stood on the corner there, unless there's another because a congregational church on the other side on Albion Street itself, which is on the other side of this, because they subdivided up into very different types of buildings. Gymnophobics is run by a lady who, for people who don't like going to the gym, but it seems that you still got to go to a gym even if you don't like to going to it. Across the other side of the road, which you'll see on a piece of film, are some houses that were built 1810 to 1814. But we're coming to a crossroads here. This is where when Paul's Percy Street comes up, and it's this building here. Although it says Friends Meeting House on it, it no longer is. It was originally built as two properties, this was, and was taken houses, I guess, and were acquired by the Quakers in 1919. The fifth of the premises up to then that the Quakers had used. They used it until 2007 when it was sold, and because it doesn't seem to be in use at all at the moment. That's Albion Street down there, so you can see some of the more modern buildings down there. I'm continuing straight across because Baker Street continues further along here as well. Like I say, these are more modern flats here, again showing that sort of a Dutch influence that is in a lot of properties around Hull. Coming down just beyond these properties here is that we can see the backs of some houses here, because if this is a frontage which is on Albion Street, and this is the rear to them around here. And these were, one of the places to come and live, I guess, when people sort of, especially in the sort of late 18th century, I guess, sort of moved slightly out of the city centre and moved northwards to this area, although it's in the city centre today. These were built between 1794 and 1796. They might all appear to be the same, but they're all slightly different. You can see this one here has got is 3 rows of windows, but this has only ever had 2 rows of windows. And again, that's a 2-row one. So they're also slightly different from one another. And although they all look the same, it's actually all built by different developers. And I guess these were the gardens they would have had behind, which are now a car park for these, a mixture of buildings, flats and shops below that as well. And if in those gardens, if you didn't have room in your back garden for a garage or something, then people built their coach houses here. And so that's what these row of buildings are, because they were both by both people who lived on Albion Street in that terrace here. So that's where they kept their coaches and horses, I guess, as well, for when they went around town. This is actually, I guess, technically put Baker Street there, but it's at the head of Baker Street. This is Union Street, a very short street that leads down to Albion Street. But on the right-hand side is this very fine building. That's that row of houses that we looked at a second ago on facing onto Albion Street. But this was built a lot later on. You can see it's not as deep, but goes the full width of Albion Street coming down here. This was the large school board offices for Hull. As I mentioned before, that schools had to be established when there weren't enough church schools in a city, and they had to go around building their own. And the ratepayers had to pay for these schools, and indeed the school board building that we look here, because the most lavish of the buildings, which weren't schools. It was built in 1898 and is now a Chinese supermarket called Chonghua, and that's the entrance into the supermarket there. I didn't know, I thought it was a Chinese restaurant actually, until I could have gone and had a look in and taken a photograph. But this now comes onto Albion Street, and not going up that way and turning left to come down here. As you'll see on the film, coming down a short bit of road here, coming to the junction, I guess, of Albion Street and Jarratt Street. And we'll see on the right-hand side, the St Charles Borromeo Roman Catholic church as well. I could say it's quite an amazing church, because it was built in 1829, really just after the Catholic Relief Act of 1825, and was consecrated on the 29th of July of 1829. And because prior to that, if you're Roman Catholic, which you have to do it in secret, priests came from Burton Constable Hall, it's about 20 miles away or more to the east of the city. And there was also a small chapel in Poston on the wall that surrounded Hull at that time. On either side of the entrance are 2 statues, as you can see there, and the one to the left, obviously, is the lady with the skirt on, is Margaret Clitheroe, 1556 to 1586. She lived on York in the Shambles and was crushed to death for harbouring Roman Catholic priests in 1586. So she was a martyr to the Roman Catholic cause. The statue on the other side is Charles Borromeo, I presume that's how it's pronounced, 1538 to 1584. He was the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan from 1560 until his death, and he helped reform the Catholic Church. He was called an austere, dedicated, humorless, and uncompromising personality, and that was by one of his admirers. But you need to go in here, as I mentioned before, open Tuesday to Friday, so don't go on a Monday, from 11 till 1 o'clock, and obviously it's open on the Sunday, but I think it's closed on a Saturday, because he didn't give me that time as well. So Tuesday to Friday, or I guess after a service on a Sunday. You need to go inside because it's absolutely amazing in there. It's like nothing else that you've probably seen in Yorkshire. And because the original architect was John Earl. He was born 1778 to 1863. But the interior was widened and remodeled in 1894 by the whole practice of Smith, Broderick and Lowther. And because they did some of the work on the outside as well. And because just looking in here is that they employed an Austrian craftsman called Heinrich Immenkamp to paint the opulent Baroque interior in the 1830s. He lived in Hull at the time. So this is all lit around the sanctuary by a dome. So I probably missed that on. Sorry, put it wrong way around. By a dome, and the dome was added in 1890. So that lights the whole of this sort of altar area around there. But just coming back around the altar as well, is that we've got sort of statues which surround either side of that. Here we have some associated definitely with Yorkshire. We've got St Helen, who was the mother of Constantine the Great, and we've also got here St Hilda, who founded Whitby Abbey as well. And to the over here we've got Thomas More, William York, John of Beverley as well. That's the statue there, the founder of Beverley I say cathedral, but it's not Minster, and the sort of the historian of sort of Christianity in England, Bede there. So because there's some the other side as well. Because it's packed full of detail around here. So because you need a good sort of half hour in here to have a look round of it as well. So that's the dome that lights that area. But if you turn around and look upwards, is that we can see the ceiling as well. This was once a flat ceiling until it was opened up with these, I guess, half lights, or not really half lights, are they? The sort of because it was opened up here to add even more colour into that. Because it opened up in 1894, and because looking back down there, you can see the gallery at the north end here as well. Like I say, held up by cast iron pillars. That's what you see on the bit of film as I go along there, which are in front of it as well. So even the Lady Chapel, because it's got two very narrow aisles onto either side, so it is really one great room. There's really nothing down this side of it, which is the east side, but down the west side, there is a Lady Chapel and some other sort of chapels, side chapels as well. But the Lady Chapel is the finest. Again, that is now lit by a dome as well, as two added in 1894. And the west side being much more detailed than the other side. So let's have a look at this area coming from the beginning of Baker Street. So let's now look on to the second part of that. So we're here at the moment, because say the church there actually technically being on Jarratt Street. This is Kingston Square, but I'm going to go around here, because say it's a square with a little park in the middle of it. The new theatre here, then coming down to the end of Jarratt Street, is a lovely, rather large Muse property here, which takes up all that area there. This is the History Centre here, which is a very modern building of 2009. The building on the opposite side of the road, which is now redundant at the moment, is a fire station of 1929, which you might see on the bit of film. I'm then coming down Grimston Street here, coming onto George Street. You'll see some very fine properties on this area here. Others were hit by the bombing in World War II along here, and unfortunately are no longer there. But this is where the Trinity House School relocated to in this area in 2013. Wilberforce Drive, as its name says, is where the statue of Wilberforce is on that very tall column, which is just about here in front of the whole college, which takes up all this area around here. That's the end of Queen's Gardens, where the Queen's Dock used to be, and was infilled in 1930. And then coming to an end here, where sort of George Street comes to an end, where it meets Freetown Way, as it's named around here, this double carriageway here. But I'm actually stopping here. There's a large mural on the side of Hull College that was painted there in October or November 2020. And then I'll be continuing across here on the next leg of it, coming up Bourne Street onto Charterhouse Lane. So this is Jarratt Street looking down. I'm stood outside the Roman Catholic Church looking straight down here. So I'm going to go round the square here and then come down to that very fine sort of house at the head of the street. So this is the Kingston Square. So I've come around the corner here. I'll just mention this is part of a brewery complex. I'll say a little bit more about it further down, but this was an extension to the brewery, because with its sort of very fine sort of like I say, minaret type tower on top of it. Here we've got Kingston Court, as it said. It wasn't a courthouse, as you'd imagine, but this was built in 1833 as the Hull and East Riding School of Medicine and Anatomy, because that closed in 1869. Not sure what happened to it after that, and was converted into flats in 2003. And coming further along this side of it, which is the west side of the square, we come to the Kingston Theatre Hotel, so called because of the across the park from it is the new theatre, which we'll see in a minute. This is really called Kingston Square, but actually the road coming down this side here is technically called John Street, and is a terrace of houses, I guess from around about 1800 or just after that, because the square was laid out in that period. But it ends here with the Christ Church schools. This was built in 1847 and was one of the few buildings that's left standing in, was by Holborn architect Cuthbert Broderick. Say 1847, that's just before he left for Leeds to design the town hall and the other buildings in the city there as well. So that's where the railroad sort of John Street sort of ends. There's sort of some educational buildings here. I think there's a bit of a theatre school as well. But I'm going to turn right along the east side of the square, obviously facing west, coming to the Hull New Theatre. And like I said, this was built in 1834, not as a theatre per se, but as assembly rooms for dances and concerts, and converted into a theatre in 1939. Before it came a theatre, there's a blue plaque just under, the blue plaque is there. The plaque there is just to say about it coming the theatre in 1939. The other plaque is there to Charles Dickens, who gave readings here when obviously it was assembly rooms. So that's what it looks like on the inside. It sort of takes touring productions in here, as well as sort of comedians who will do one-night stands and other things like that. So I guess it's a bit more of a popular theatre than the Hull Truck, who obviously do modern productions in their theatre around there. In front of it, facing onto the door, is this statue of David Whitfield, which somebody as kindly has placed a sort of roll-up thing as a bit of a cigarette in his mouth along there. He was Hull-born, born in 1925. He was a crooner who notably sang with the Mantovani Orchestra and had a #1 in 1954 with the well-known hit Cara Mia. Unfortunately died of a brain hemorrhage whilst on tour in Sydney, Australia at the age of 54. So because they're spreading Hull's fame around the world. That's David Whitfield. We'll see another crooner a bit later on from exactly the same period, having hits really at the before they were all kicked out by the rock and roll era, between really 1953 to probably 57 or something like that, when it really became old hat. Like I said, I mentioned across the road from this, running down the south side, so obviously facing north, is the brewery or former brewery. And because the oldest part in here, which I guess is some of the buildings in here, date from 1869. So it must have been, to say that there's very fine houses around here, it would have been that smell of brewing all the way around the city centre around this way as well. That 5-storey block that we see earlier on with the cupola on the top, that was added in 1908. Because it was brought out by the Mansfield Brewery in 1985, probably to take away the competition from there, and they promptly closed it that year as well, and has now been converted into, as it says on there, the Maltings apartments, which are really around a central courtyard that we can see in there. We can see some of the more fine buildings coming down on either side of Jarratt Street. Named after John Jarratt. Don't really know much about him, but he died in the early 1800s. And at the top stands Charlotte Street Mews. Charlotte Street actually runs along here, but it seems to take its name from it. But technically, it's actually on a street called Worship Street, as it says on the plaque over there. Charlotte Street is actually quite a nice sort of stone set street, because it just runs now behind some more modern buildings, which are on George Street, the other side. I think we pick up Charlotte Street a bit later on as well, because they've been sort of chewed up in the sort of mixture of sort of road developments over the centuries. And this is a grand house built in 1806. It's unusually, as we'll see in a minute, sort of been eaten into on that side by the pub called the Old English Gentleman. But this side, because it's called Worship Street, there's no sort of chapels on here anymore, apart from here. But obviously it's a closed society because it belongs now to the Seventh-day Adventists. And I guess they sort of formed, I guess, internationally in 1863, because they were descended from the Millerites, who believed that Jesus Christ's second advent, because his second coming to earth, would occur on the 22nd of October, 1844. So whether they still believe that or not, I'm not quite sure. But like I say, it's a closed church, which means I think you have to be invited to join that. But that's where they are, a very fine Worship Street sign above it. At the other end, as I mentioned, is the Old English Gentleman. And you're probably quite surprised that it sort of exists in this sort of backwater here. But if you go inside, the walls are adorned with pictures of people who have performed at the new theatre, including Laurel and Hardy. Excuse me there. But on the side, on the opposite side here, is the very fine Hull History Centre, because this unusual building opened in 2009. It's technically a 2-storey building, and because it has 24 parabolas or something like that, or they call them polymer cushions, that go along the whole of that frontage as well, because it gives it a very unusual, very modern feel to it. It stores inside the archives of the city and also of the University of Hull as well. So I'm not going to go up Worship Street, but just where the Seventh-day Adventist is, that's Charlotte Street that goes on here. This is called the Grimston Street that comes down here and joins George Street at the end. There's quite a fine professional tailors here, bespoke tailors here, in a property you just can't see that just stands back from the side of a road. I'm not quite sure what these buildings were, but they certainly look like they were sort of frontages to warehouses or something like that. Although the very last one has got some green sort of Bermontoft or Leeds fireclay tiles on the lower part of it. So we come down to meet George Street there. That's Grimston Street coming down here. And this is where we've got this lovely building here as well. This is the houses here. They date from, excuse me, 1782 and designed by George Mountain. I say he's cleverly, by putting this very fine suspended stairs up here, opened up, I guess these are servants' quarters here on the sort of basement level down here. Because they also continued along here, this fine sort of terrace of houses, but these were very badly damaged by bombing in World War II and then subsequently demolished. And where they did stood now stands the Trinity House Academy. This is the school that was founded in 1787, but stood by the side of Prince's Dock and is now basically a car park, which I showed you a few weeks ago. And it was to train boys for a career in the merchant or the Royal Navy. I don't know if it still does that or not, or whether they still wear the uniform as part of attending it. But in 2013, it moved from that location. It's now called Zebedee Yard down there after one of the headmasters, and has now become part of the Delta Academy and is now on this street. So you can see it still says the old traditional the badge for the school. That near enough stands at the top of the, looking down the street, Wilberforce Drive. So you can see exactly where we are from when we've been around here before. The Queen's Gardens coming across here. That's the tower of the Guildhall, still covered in scaffolding as it was a month or two ago, and the statue for William Wilberforce on the column there. This whole area around here is really all part of Hull College. And this grew out of the Hull Municipal Training College, founded in 1913, became Hull College in 1976. And now, as only these colleges and the whole mixture of the education system can be, is part of the University of Lincoln. I think Hull College at one time was also has interests in Harrogate until 2019. And I think that the University of Lincoln also has interests in Scarborough as well. So, but it has 25,000 students. And this is really coming to the end. This is a sort of Freetown Way just over here. So it's really a sort of a large junction around here. But coming to look at this mural, which seemed very popular at the moment, whether it's sort of a part of a COVID type thing or not, I don't know. But Leeds certainly has a lot more murals than ever has before. And this is part of the Shoreline project that began in October 2020. And this was the first mural that was created as part of that. It's 15 meters tall and part of on the side of the Wilberforce building of Hull College. And it took the students Calvin Innes and Andy P just 6 days to complete in October/November 2020. And that's what we can see on the side there. So let's have a look at this bit of film coming down to this area. let's cross across this dual carriageway here. That photograph of the mural is on that building there, so it's only about a minute's walk across here. There are some pedestrian lights somewhere around here to cross onto it, and so I'm coming to come down Bourne Street down here and then go on to Charterhouse Lane, and just coming to the end of that, I could say Bourne Street's longer than Charterhouse Lane is, but well worth the detour coming down here to see this range of buildings around here. I could say it could continue on, you could come down Wilcombe onto our next section here, but this is particularly an unattractive area of sort of wasteland and sort of industrial sheds and other things like that, because the section after this, I'm going to come up Charlotte Street and then come down here onto the top of High Street around here. So that's where I'm coming next, but this is a detour just across here because it's well worth it. So coming across there, this is where the traffic lights are. This very I have to say, I'll be particularly not happy having this in my memory particular, but because they have a small triangular bit of garden is in memory of both David Whitfield and another crooner who this plaque here is just in these rose trees just there. And he is Ronnie Hilton, not his actual birth name. His birth name was Adrian Hill, and because a contemporary of David Whitfield. He was born a year after, 1926, and had hits in the same period as well, 1954 to 1959, and a few sporadically in the 1960s as well. His biggest hit was No Other Lover, a cover of a Perry Como song that was quite traditional in the 50s, is to take an American hit and recreate it as an English style. That was #1 in 1956. He died in 2001 at the age of 75 in the south of Britain. He was a gentle gentleman and a true professional, as it says there as well. So coming down here, this is Bourne Street. So it actually comes to a dead end. It's blocked off by these bollards here. So you can't actually get onto that sort of Freetown way. And that is the sort of where you're going to go down. This is there's this this care home here, but this building that stands just back there, that's the Elim Pentecostal church. But we're heading for the head of the street here, and where these trees are, and this is where Charterhouse Lane is, as it says on there, and the first of the almshouses, which is in this area. And total, there are 32 flats in this area for 40 residents, and you must be aged 60 and over and in need. This is a more modern one here. It's got 3 plaques on the side of it. There, the one in the middle says that it was built or rebuilt this in 1978. And on either side of these smaller roundels here, plaques here to Matthew and his brother John Alred. And John, notable for signing Charles I's death warrant in, I guess, late 1648. He didn't last much longer himself. He died at the age of 44 in 1651. His younger brother, Matthew, had a very long life and died in 1694. They're here because the Allareds owned the land around here. It's part of something that's going on in Hull, putting plaques to people associated with the city around it as well. I've not picked up on all of them, but we've passed some on Market Street as well, which I've not picked up, but they are there as well. But really what we come down this street to see is to the right-hand side, looking down there. You can't actually see the main part of it as well. But really, it's a cut-off part of the city centre, because it probably isn't visited that much. But behind these railings here, we have the Charterhouse. It was founded by the Carthusians and sometimes was called Sutton's Hospital. Charterhouse also sort of translated as a God's house as well. And so the Carthusians had a monastery, came out of, they first established in London in 1371, and Hull's was built in 1378. The Carthusians also built the last abbey to be built in Britain as well, and Mount Grace Priory up in North Yorkshire, and that was in 1398. And It was been founded in France in 1084. So this is the Charterhouse. It's really an almshouse. It were founded in 1384 by Michael de la Pole. He was the first mayor of Hull, and his statue, I guess after the works have been done on the sort of waterfront, well, I guess will be replaced there as well. And really where the almshouse stood was next door to the monastery, and initially was for 13 men and 13 women, and looked after by a priest master. And to say at the centre of this, under the cupola, is a chapel, which residents are expected to attend on Sundays. To say it was lucky to survive really the Charterhouse for a number of times. It was survived the dissolution of the monasteries because it was considered to be part of that as well, but was taken over by the Hull Corporation as an almshouse. It was destroyed during the Civil War and had to be rebuilt between 1649 and 1650. But even that building has disappeared as it was rebuilt in the 1700s as well, and also damaged, to say some of it, but in the Second World War as well. But largely what we see today is 1778 to 1780. So that's the frontage of it along there. You'll see it better on the film. But I guess you can see how it goes as a sort of, I guess, an inverse C round there. But across the other side of the road is the Master's House. And I guess this was, again, rebuilt after the Civil War on the same site, but it stood. Because this was more badly damaged by a bomb in 1941, but rebuilt as it looked between 1954 and 56. So that's really, it's got a large enclosed garden to the rear around there as well. It's also got this plaque above the door, which is to Michael de la Pole, 1384. There's another plaque on it as well, a roundel there, and that was to Andrew Marvell, whose father was the master of the Charterhouse from 1624 to 1640. And Andrew grew up here, lived here, and obviously went to the grammar school over by the Holy Trinity church in the centre of Hull itself. So not too far away. So that's what we can see around here. And at the end of the street, we can see a board school here that was built in 1881, and is now owned by the Hull University. I have no idea what's inside of that, but that one entrance says boys, and I guess around the other side it's girls. This is the easiest one to see because there's quite a lot of walling and other things around there to see the full extent of the school. We can see it's got a bell tower on the top of that up there. So this is the looking around the Charterhouse. So let's look at, because that's Winconley coming down there, the behind of the school. So I'm actually coming further around here, rejoining Charlotte Street. This building here is part of Hull College, coming here to really join sometimes called Dock Office Row, or certainly the High Street coming down here. Notable here, this street here, which I don't picture is because it's really sort of an industrial sort of back street now, called North Walls. That's on the line of the north wall of the wall that surrounded Hull, so would have gone as far as here and then protected by the River Hull. So that's probably why we see a slight change in here. The other thing to notice here, this is Queen's Gardens, so that's the former Queen's Dock that's now being infilled, and there are 3 dry docks down here. The middle one, just above the old dock offices, which is here, was actually the entrance into that. So boating would have come up here and then turned left or westwards into the dock coming along the line here. That would have been outside just the north walls itself. So we'll see that. And then coming back, and we're going to end today here at the top of what we normally call High Street, where I set off before. And this is part of Alfred Gelder Street, pushed through in 1900. And that's Drypool Bridge as well, that we've been on before as well. So this is really creating a sort of linear walk coming round to the end of the, or the top of the High Street that we looked down before. So this is, I guess, a continuation of Charlotte Street, another sort of building of the Hull College. This is the North Bridge here. I guess it's probably contemporary with Drypool Bridge, which was rebuilt in this style in 1961, a little further down as well. So we're going to come round the side of this building here, and this brings you onto the, I guess, the top of either the High Street or whether you want to call it Dock Office Row. Unfortunately, you don't see the rear of this building. This is Charlotte Street, again continuing on here, which sort of really comes to an end today at these gates, but I guess would have continued onto a wharf at the side of the River Hull, just over there. These is a 5-storey warehouse that was built in 1870, and I guess a bit similar to the Pease warehouses that we looked down on the other side of High Street a few weeks ago as well. It's now been converted into flats as well. And then there's some rather large, fine buildings down here. This is called Dock Office Row, and these were, I could say, a late 18th century house. As we come down here, this rather large gate here and the stone and a brick wall hides another dry dock, which is in this area behind it. I couldn't really get over to see a picture of it. It'd probably been best going across the North Bridge and taking a photograph of that warehouse and looking back on it, and probably able to see the dry dock from there. But certainly there are 2 further dry docks down this street. This is the one here, which is far easier to see because it's just got like a metal gate across the front of it. And because this is the one where the shipping came up and came down here. So it wasn't really a dry dock. It would have been a lock, I guess, and then turned into Queen's Dock that was built, the first dock in Hull, built in 1778. And I guess when that dock was infilled in 1930, this then became a dry dock. Now, this has recently, in the last year or so, been emptied, or the silt been taken out of there. And this is where the Sidewinder trawler, the Arctic Corsair, will be put, because it's docked, I think, down in the main Hull docks at the moment. And then you will be able to come and visit it up here. And I think it's going to be on some sort of, the dry dock is going to be emptied of water, and then you'll be able to go down and wander underneath the that as well. So the silt of that taken out in 2019. So I guess this area will become a sort of a bit more gentrified, perhaps, or more visitors will come down here to look at this area at the top of High Street. So this, because it was the main entrance to the dock, and that be the reason why. Sorry, that's a hardly legible thing in the pavement, but it just basically says this was the entrance to the Queen's Dock. You don't notice it, you easy to walk over it. So when I came back up the street, noticed that it was there. But this is the reason why this very fine building was built here, because these were the first port offices, I guess, built in 1820. It was, really a fine Georgian building here, and then this sort of three bay area was added on in 1840. I'm surprised this building still stands, because the one in the Victoria Square in the centre, which is now the Maritime Museum, were the new dock offices that were built in 1871. There's probably a reason for that. It's largely because this was then out on the limb, really, because of the building of the other docks, the Prince's Dock in 1829, and prior to that, the Humber Dock, now the Marina, in 1809, because the new dock offices are now the Maritime Museum. I don't think that opens until 2024, as it's been completely renovated on the inside of there. But it's lovely that this building still stands. Like I say, if you look at the cupola on the top, and there it's got a bit of a ship up there as well. And as I mentioned, this really faces just above where that road, the north wall was, because the north, largely the walls of Hull were taken down, I guess, between 1780 and 1820 in that area as well. But just go back, is that there's another dry dock here. If you stand on that step, you can look into this dry dock, and that's what it looks like. It actually didn't belong to the dock company, this one. It was called Blades Dock. And because they're a family whose house we'll see in a minute. And it was here that they built the ship Bertha between 1782 and 1784, and was later renamed HMS Bounty, as it was bought by the Royal Navy for £1,950 in 1787, equivalent of £250,000 today, because it was led to the mutiny on it, led by Fletcher Christian against the Captain William Bligh in 1789. I say it's largely an industrial area on the other side of the river that you just can't quite see there. The next property along is quite nice, Barton House as well, because it's a particularly attractive area of Hull. Like I say, coming down here is that I think I met about one person, so it's not frequented at all. And then really ends with this very fine property here. This is Blades House, after that shipbuilding family, who are also merchants as well. This was built around about 1750 on the site of an earlier building, because it was built for Benjamin Blades, who was the shipping merchant and builder around here as well. Up on the top floor up there at one time, he actually had, I guess, a sort of a lookout so that he could see ships coming up and down the River Hull. Notable for shipbuilding there, very fine property there. I think that also belongs to the University of Hull for their maritime department or something like that. And then we end at the bottom of High Street here, because Alfred Gelder Street comes across here, and to the left-hand side, we've got the Drypool Bridge as well. And that's the continuation of the High Street. That's where we came down before. This is where the Pease warehouse is in there, where they have now been converted into apartments there, where you sort of made linseed oil and other types of things that were imported from flax seeds and other things like that. So that's the continuation of where we met.